Welcome to the Julie Laughton Living Podcast, the place to get advice, tips, and tricks to building the life and luxury home of your dreams with 30-year business owner, designer, and builder, Julie Laughton. It all starts with a good plan. This is Julie Laughton Living.
Welcome back to the Julie Laughton Living Podcast. Today we're going to talk about what's the difference between an architect and an interior designer. But before we do that, don't forget to check out my 7 simple steps, and those will take you through the process so you understand everything you're going to go through before you go through your remodel process. Okie dokie. Okay, here's the difference between an architect and an interior designer. And just so you know, most architects don't do interior design, and most interior designers don't do, of course, they don't do architecture, but some interior designers only do like what I do, what's screwed and glued to the walls, and then they do the furniture and the accessories separately. So there's 2 components to an interior designer. So you're really looking at 3 things with the 2 people. So the architect designs the building, the space plan, where all the rooms go, the overall layout, looks at the whole yard with the landscape architect, because that's another component to all this. So the outside, so you have a landscape architect, you have an architect, an interior designer. But if you just take the building, there's the architect does, the windows and the doors, and like I said, the structure and where it sits on the lot and the sun and the windows, like I said, that. But the interior designer is the person that helps us. What's the flooring? What's the cabinets? What's the countertops? What's the backsplash? What's the tile? What are the light fixtures? What's attached to the home? That's one component. And then the other component is, okay, what's my furniture, artwork, and accessories, plants, all that stuff. That's the soft goods. So you got fixed goods and soft goods. So the soft goods are what you would take away if you would move. So there's the components. It's 3 things. And the architect and the interior designer work together on the first 2, the building and what's attached to the building. And then the decorating, I call it, the furniture, that's separate. So don't get that confused. And the architects, like I said, some of them will provide the interior design, which makes it so easy, so much easier. That's what I do. I combine the plans with the interior design. Then if you want furniture, that's another service. But the plans should come complete with what is included in the building package, which is the actual materials. Like, what are we installing? You can't bid a project unless you know the flooring and the countertops and the cabinets and blah, 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 and all that stuff. So that's the difference. So when you have a project, whether it's a remodel or a custom home, somebody has to draw the plans that show where the walls are moving and where the windows are going, which is essentially the architectural set. And then there's details of how to build that, including, how the walls are going to go in the gutters and the eaves and the baseboards and the casing and all those details of the millwork and all that. But with that set of architectural drawings, you should have the complete set would include the interior design for the items screwed and glued to the surfaces, the floors, the counters, the backsplash, the tile, the shower design. Everything that's actually installed should be on that set or a separate set included with that set. And not to get complicated, but the interior design set doesn't go to the city. Only the architectural set goes to the city, which is the structural and the engineering. But your interior design set is there for the people who build it. City doesn't care what color your tile is or what room it goes in, but they do care, the architectural, what's going to be built and all that, to code stuff. So there's 2 components to your set, your full set, before the contractor can bid it. And then the third component is the furniture and furnishings. And your contractor doesn't really care about that, but you got to have it because you got to lay out your furniture and you got to move in one day. So that's got to be done too. So 3 components to 2 people. Okay, so when you start your process, you might find someone like me who does all 3, but probably not. So what it is, but you will find some architects that do the interior design. And if they don't, of course, they're going to recommend it to most likely an interior designer who will help you pick the stuff screwed and glued to the walls. And then that's the first 2 things that are done, is the architectural plans and the finishes. So it's called the finishes, by the way. So those 2 people get hired first, and then the engineers get hired, and then the contractor should come in and help with the pre-construction bidding along the way as soon as the plans get developed. And then the interior decoration part can happen after that beginning stage of the plans is done. So once you get the plans of the architecture and the screwed and glued to the walls items, everything attached to the home done, then you can move on to the finishes and the soft goods. So it's kind of a step-by-step process. But again, it's in my 7 simple steps if you want to check it out. But that's how the process works. So the whole process when you're dealing with your architect and your interior designer, you're dealing with two different people, but like with me, you're just dealing with me as one person, but I address things differently according to what I'm doing. So if I'm just doing the plans, we're going to talk about, if I put this window here and expand this room, how much is it going to cost? Because I have my engineer involved at the same time, and I already know what we're going to do because I get the engineer involved immediately. But there's a whole thing about if I build this building a certain way, what will it cost? And then when you bring in the interior designer, that's a whole nother meeting about. So when I act as the interior designer, the meeting is more about how do you want it to look? How do you want it to feel? Do you want how much maintenance do you want to deal with? Do you want real marble or you want quartzite? Do you want to, what are we doing as far as, the finishes? Because some people don't want any maintenance. And so we do porcelain and the man-made countertops, which is nice. But the interior design is really more about how you want it to look, how you want it to feel. What's your dream? What's your dream home? That's the dream home part, because the architecture is more of the function to accomplish this, and that's the nuts and bolts and the structural. So it's two different conversations for sure. Yeah. So when you deal with 3 different people, like your architect, your interior designer, and your contractor, they have to all communicate because it's your dreams that are coming to life. So if one of them has an idea, like whatever, dude, it's one idea. There's a theme, and it's the dream house for the client. And that theme is communicated through the architecture and the interior design. And then the contractor follows along and builds it. But if the two aren't in sync, and then you got, you got a mid-century modern house with a designer doing French country furniture, that's not going to work. So you got to be careful and make sure the team has your theme in mind. That's number one. But so it can get complicated, but if you have the right team, they will work together. So in my case, when you're working with one person, that's what I'm doing the whole time, is thinking about the architecture, thinking about the interior design, which is the finishes, the feel and the look and the function all together. And then add the cost onto that, because I know what it'll cost if we move a wall or move a window. So as we're developing the plans, the benefit to having a contractor like myself as your designer is everything we do affects the budget. And I can tell you immediately, whereas you might not find out till later with an architect or an interior designer what it's going to cost, because it takes a minute to price it all out. And then the architect's got to talk to the engineer, and the engineer's got to draw something, and then the contractor looks like, oh, and then there's your price. It's a delayed reaction when you're dealing with the 3 people, because the engineer's involved in the background. So it's quite complicated, but at the benefit, again, having the one-stop shop like myself, I actually kind of know the price before I even call the engineer. I mean, we consult constantly. So it's quicker to find out the result when you're dealing with one person, but it's the same process. You just have to deal with more people. Thank you for joining me on this podcast discussing the difference between an architect and an interior designer. And no matter what you do, check out the 7 simple steps so you know what you're in for. Because when you do a remodel or a custom home ground up, there's a process. And my 7 simple steps describes it. We'll see you next time on the Julie Laughton Living Podcast, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Julie Laughton Living. For more information or to connect with Julie one-on-one, visit julielaughtonliving.com. And don't forget, it all starts with a good plan.